Welcome to the Douglas Murray channel. Today we have a debate between Douglas Murray and Sylvana Simmonds, which will be juicy.
Thank you both very much. I think listening to both of you and looking at your work, what comes across to me is whether the struggle for rights, be they gay or gender, LGBT, whether the battle has been won or not, because many feel that they need to keep shouting, pushing with language, because they feel, for example, there is not equality in whatever sphere it is that we might want to talk about. So that could be gay rights, that could be women's rights, that could be racial justice. How do you feel, Douglas, when we talk about that? Do you feel, when I read your book, it came across to me that you feel a lot of the battles were almost won?
Well, I do. I use this analogy that in many of these areas, it's been my experience in my adult life that it's looked like watching a train reaching the desired destination, that is, at the station of equality. And as it draws in, suddenly getting ahead of steam, shooting off down the tracks, off the tracks, and scattering people in its wake. What I mean by that is the weaponization of things at the stage at which they've never got better, where they're presented as if they've never been worse. And I just urge people to take their foot off that pedal a little bit. That isn't to say don't keep moving, but don't lean on...
The dialogue pivots to the impact of cultural events on public perspectives. Douglas Murray cites a recent incident where a contentious speaker faced a ban, igniting debate. This prompts reflection on the limits of free speech in public arenas. Should platforms extend to controversial voices, or do they risk amplifying harmful rhetoric?
Sylvana, what would you respond?
Well, I always think it's necessary to really understand that even though my emancipation has reached a certain level where I can say that I now have certain privileges, it doesn't mean to say that that goes for everybody who's part of, let's say, that particular group that's identifying within a certain scope. So let's make it more concrete and say that it's fine if you're a female exec, like myself, for instance. I'm a female party leader. So it's easy for me to say that, that's doable, that's possible. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of young women who look like me do not have the same privileges and are still fighting so many battles that maybe I've overcome because of, Lord knows why, could be just my, my dominant character. But it's not to say that they have the same opportunities and the same privileges, so they still have a long way to go. And I know from experience that it's important for them to have role models and people that speak out on their behalf.
Well, let me pass it back to Douglas then. Do you feel you can always speak as freely as you want to?
Myself, yes. I think that I'm in as it were, a very privileged position. I know this from audiences and readers who are in touch with me, that increasingly the things I describe which have caused career destruction for very eminent people. I mean, thinking of things like the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Tim Hunt, who made this one joke at a conference in Korea, and by the time he'd landed in London, he'd lost every job.
The debaters discuss the changing landscape of free speech. They touch on the impact of social media on public discourse. The debaters discuss the changing landscape of free speech. They touch on the impact of social media on public discourse. Sylvana Simmonds argues that social media amplifies divisive voices. Do you think social media is a force for good or bad in public debate?
It has happened to very prominent people. They've either said something that's not that popular anymore or said something off colour, and so on and so forth. But my point is that all of that stuff trickles down to the workplace. And what I'm struck by now is the extent to which people who are not self-employed journalists and writers feel that they can't say the things that some people in public can say. So, for instance, let me give one very quick example. I did this on the BBC the other week, that this issue came up with this pop singer Sam Smith, who described himself as non-binary. And I got into a certain amount of trouble, it didn't bother me, but because I said I don't think there's any such thing, or at least no one's explained what it is sufficiently for me to agree to it. Now, I know from feedback, including feedback in the studio from certain people at the BBC, that this is not an unpopular thing to say. I would think that if you went out to the general public and said, do you think there are people who are non-binary, and if so, can you say what they are? You'd get a fragment of 1% of people able to say that. And so my point on that is not that I've closed the argument on that, but we haven't had the argument on a whole set of things, and it seems only to be a few people who do have a voice in public who can have it.
Silvana, you're nodding your head, not in agreement.
Because I'm always surprised that certain people feel that they need to give their okay for other people to be or think something they don't necessarily understand. It doesn't matter whether I understand the beauty.
The conversation shifts to the role of cultural events in shaping public opinion. Douglas Murray references a recent event where a controversial speaker was banned. This sparks discussion on the boundaries of acceptable speech in public forums. Should controversial figures be given platforms to speak?
Oh, point, you don't need my permission to feel and act. So why does Sam Smith or anybody else who considers himself non-binary needs permission from whoever? All that is up to us is to say, if this is important to you and it does not affect me in any type of way, in any type of negative way, I'm going to respect that. So if you say that you're offended by blackface every year, then I don't need to understand how come you're offended. All I need to do is say, this is not my intention. How can I fix it? And if you say you can fix it by stop acting that way, then that's what I'll do, because there is no point. People don't need your permission to be whoever they want to be.
I think it's slightly more complex than that, if I can say so.
Of course.
Let me give one reason why. Actually, the Sam Smith thing was significant. Again, sorry to go on about the BBC. The BBC's reporting of that immediately did what he asked, which was that they changed the pronouns. And some people think this isn't a big thing. Some of us do get a bit stuck on this.
I'm only interrupt you just so everybody is up to speed with the sense of, instead of he, she, him, her, non-binary people often want to use they, them. So it would be...
So my point was simply that if you haven't actually had this out in public, you haven't actually discussed much of it, it's a bit strange that a major news organisation would slip into saying exactly what a person...
The debaters explore the historical context of free speech and its evolution. They highlight how different eras have handled dissenting voices. Silvana Simmons brings up historical examples to argue their point. How do historical precedents influence our current understanding of free speech?
Sounds like respect to me.
It's not
nothing more, nothing less.
It's not the same thing as respect, because it's something which we haven't had out. He himself said, I don't know what it means to be non-binary. So my suggestion was he should go away and think about it. And in the meantime, we shouldn't all mutilate the language to fit around him.
Why? If I come on this stage and I say to you, I would prefer for you to call me Mr. Simons, why is it a problem to you to just give me that respect?
But well, I'm afraid that because I care about the language, I didn't particularly want to say they was very good in their performance last night.
Well,
I'm not going to do it simply because of the... Now, sorry, there is a more important thing, if I may say so.
Sure,
which is that actually this one is a very niche bit of a thing. Whether a pop star thinks they're non-binary or genderqueer or whatever is not that significant. Now, there is one that's very significant, which we're all tripping over now, which is the trans one. And you mentioned the thing about the phobia there. There is a real problem in our societies on this one, because actually in the media, people are petrified now of writing about this issue. But outside there in the country, as you can see from a new poll that's about to come out tomorrow, the general public are deeply concerned about being dismissed as transphobes when you're talking about how you deal with children. And that isn't a small concern. It's not just about pronouns. It's a legitimate concern of the general public about the well-being of children. I'm bothered when people make assertions which we haven't litigated in public yet. And on a whole set of issues at the moment, look, the way I see it is, I'm sure you're all people who've seen sheepdogs in operation, but if you see a sheepdog trying to get a herd of sheep, it doesn't need to go and force them into a corner. It goes and not even nips, but pretends to nip around the edges. And
The debate intensifies as they discuss the consequences of speech in the digital age. Douglas Murray emphasizes the personal repercussions of speaking out. They argue that the stakes are higher now than ever before. Do you agree that the consequences of speech are more severe today?
there is a real and significant risk in our society with the free press at the moment that people coming and making very slight nips around the edges make the whole herd move in another direction. That is exactly what's happened with
What
this.
are you worried about will be the end result?
I'm worried that we tell little lies, and we get used to little lies, and then we tell bigger ones. I think it's a lie to pretend that biology doesn't matter. I think it's unwise to pass those things through always simply because of courtesy. Courtesy, I happen to agree, is one of the bedrocks of society. It's very important to be courteous, but that's not... Courtesy has a limit, and the limit is
I didn't
when
use the
it
word
makes
courtesy.
people...
I used the word respect, and there's a big difference between courtesy and respect. Respect is what we absolutely need in order to live together on this planet as a diverse society, something that is hard to accept for certain people, but we are a diverse society. What we see happening is new perspectives coming in. New people saying we want to have our seat at the table because we can either represent ourselves or, as myself, have been given the mandate to represent certain groups of people. Now, those same people who for decades, if not hundreds of years, have been the dominant factor in deciding what is on the table, are afraid. I do understand. I don't understand what they're afraid of. I think I do, but I'd like to hear from them. And also, I don't understand why it is of such importance to them that other people emancipate in the way they think is best.
If I may just put one thing on the end of that. On the diversity issue, I entirely agree, of course. I mean, our societies are trying to cope with a very swift increase in diversity of the kind that we've been talking about.
There's always been diversity. There's
not like
always
this.
been diversity. There's always been black people, Asian people, people of different gender, people of different sexual
of course
preferences.
There's been some.
Always have been around.
Just one at a time, though, so we can...
Of course there's been some, but I'm saying not like this. And we are struggling with it. And I would suggest there's a useful lesson for speech in this from a very good book by the Danish journalist Flemming Rose, who wrote a book called The Tyranny of Silence a few years ago. And he made a point that I think is just worth us bearing in mind, which is, he said, in his view, that there were only two ways you could go with dealing with an increasingly diverse society. You, broadly speaking, had the choice of limiting speech or having to get people used to the fact there'd be more speech than they'd ever been used to before. And of the two, the latter, despite how painful it is far more preferable. I think the interesting thing about the whole issue of offence is not the problem with the...
In the conclusion, they contemplate the future of free speech. Both debaters agree that open dialogue is crucial, but differ on how to achieve it. They propose different strategies for fostering healthy public discourse. What steps can we take to ensure a balanced approach to free speech? Thank you for watching today's debate. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you stand on these issues. Remember to like and subscribe for more engaging discussions.